meeting.
A higher pay.
It's 5 o'clock, and this is the committee of the whole. And we have today 2 items on the agenda. The first
Recording in
item,
progress.
obviously, I didn't wait for the recording in progress. But I'm calling this meeting to order. This is the committee of the whole. We have 2 items on the agenda. Was dot I-405/SR-167 corridor program update. And I welcome whoever is going to be presenting tonight with the transportation department, I'm assuming, right?
Waiting on one more.
It's okay. If you just can introduce yourselves, Guy, I will appreciate it.
Go ahead.
My name is Sharif Shaklawoon. I'm the project director for Renton to Bellevue project. Watch that.
There we go.
Okay, I'm here to give you an update on the Renton to Bellevue widening project and express toll lanes. The project is extending the express toll lanes from Bellevue to SR 167, and coupled with the direct connector we just completed 3 years ago, that will complete the 50 mile express toll lane system that we've been working on. The project adds some general purpose capacity. We're adding a lane from I-90 southbound to 112 northeast southeast Avenue, and we're also adding another general purpose lane from northeast 44th Street to northeast 30th. The project will add direct access at 44th interchange and 112th interchange with inline bus rapid transit stations. We also, as part of this project, we are working on constructing the East Rail for the King County from Ripley Lane north to Bellevue. We have completed the section from Ripley Lane to Coal Creek and was open to the public last November. And we are working on the north section now. We're building the bridge at Wolverton, the old Wolverton Tunnel. Some of the other work we've been coordinating with is the coordination with Mountain to Sound Greenway Trail, as well as it crosses 405. As you know, the effect of the COVID-19 and the regional concrete strike has some effect on the schedule. We are not as far along as we would like to be on this project, even though we have not changed the contractual milestones in the project, but the updated schedule from the contractor does show that the opening of the express toll lanes are shown in the schedule on 2025. However, we have been working with the contractor to mitigate these impacts, see how we can be able to bring it back or just work on mitigation to this delay. This is a corridor update. Basically, the left side of the screen, there's the two pictures on the left side. This is the Lakehurst Creek emergency repair. This part of the work is emergency repair that's not part of the Renton to Bellevue project, but we're just going to give you an update on this. Earlier this year, we we basically we had two sinkholes developed along the Lakehurst Creek crossing under 405. One was in the median, was developed back in last March, and we filled that one immediately because it was in the median and affecting the main line traffic. And then in June, we had another sinkhole developed in the Park and Ride on 112th. So we have filled that one as well, and we have been working on repairing basically fixing that crossing there. We have completed the crossing across 405 back in September. It was a one weekend work or activity that involved the closure of 405 in both directions at different times, and was completed over the weekend. And then right now we are completing the other sections, and all of the work on this emergency repair should be completed by the end of this year. The middle pictures on the screen, they are for Main Street Bridge replacement. The demolition of Main Street took place in the weekend of June 17th. This was a weekend closure. It took 56 hours of closure, 405, both directions. We had a large crew working on this, and it was a very successful weekend. Everything was completed on time. Some of the fun facts on this closure and the demo of that 260-foot three-span bridge. We had more than 100 workers working during that weekend. The work included 1,000 tons of asphalt paving, 2,500 tons of concrete and steel removal, and 1,000 yards of excavation and embankment. The closure was a huge success. Our communication team was very successful to get the word out, and we achieved about 70% diversion of the traffic on 405. We worked with the city of Bellevue throughout the weekend to mitigate any issues that came up during the weekend work. The next two slides on the right side of the screen, this is the Wilburton Bridge, or the pedestrian bridge across 405. We just set the girders about a month and a half ago, and we're planning to pour the deck on this bridge in the next week or two, weather dependent. And so currently we're working on this north section of the trail to be completed early next year. At the Northeast 44th Street interchange, this work here we have been focused on the section between May Creek and Northeast 44th interchange. There's a lot of ground improvement and a lot of walls being built in that area. We just completed the east half of the northbound May Creek Bridge. We're building the northbound of the May Creek Bridge in two sections or two phases. We completed the east half of the northbound, and in the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we're going to switch the northbound traffic to this new bridge, and we'll be shifting the traffic to the east to close the old May Creek Bridge for demolition, So we'll be demolishing that bridge starting next month. And we also be completing shifting the northbound off farm to northeast 44th. So that will be shifted to the east a little bit, and at the end of this month, you'll see the shift of traffic to the new bridge and shifting the northbound off farm. And then in January time frame, we'll be opening the northbound on-ramp from northeast 44th. We will be installing a temporary signal at the 44th interchange and northbound and southbound ramps. Next, I think that's the update for the project. And Rob here will go back and talk about the program.
Take our keys there for Rob.
Hello, I apologize for being late. The irony of being stuck on 405 is not lost on me.
Thank you for feeling our pain.
All right, so I'm just going to go over a basic program update. I think it's going to be fairly familiar territory for many of you. And thank you to Sharif for having given some project updates for Renton Bellevue as well. So I am Rob Wick. I'm the Deputy Program Administrator. I think many of you know Lisa Hodgson. I report directly to her. So I came into this role about 1.5 years ago during COVID. So while I think I'm familiar with most of your names, I think this is the first time I've actually seen you in person. So thank you for having us. All right, so moving on to this general slide, and I think you might have actually seen this before, but I'll go over it in some detail here. The corridor is important to the region and the state. 45167 forms a multimodal corridor with 50 miles of reliable ETLs that are a choice to use when needed most, also providing the infrastructure for BRT and carpools. The 405 Master Plan and 167 Corridor Plan are the foundational documents that guide the program. Renton has been a partner to WashDOT and provided critical feedback on the master plan as a member of the Executive Advisory Group. Thank you to Executive O'Halloran, or Councilmember O'Halloran. The main purpose for our program is to deliver our comprehensive strategy to reduce traffic congestion, improve mobility and safety performance, accommodate planned regional growth, and enhance the quality of life for the environment and the communities we serve in the corridor. Together, this 50-mile corridor forms a viable alternative to Interstate 5, moving people and goods throughout the Puget Sound region, and is a part of the strategic highway network for the Department of Defense. The plan is a multimodal, multi-agency plan with more than 150 individual but coordinated projects. And as you can see from the percentages on the slide, we're making significant progress towards the completion of our master plan with plenty of more work on the horizon. WashDOT is active in statewide and regional efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve multimodal choices. And the 405167 program is part of those efforts with our work to bring integrated multimodal solutions to the corridor that are aimed at keeping people moving. We're excited to have 95% of our 50-mile ETL system completed or funded because this system will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions by decreasing the level of stop-and-go conditions, thereby conserving fuel. The ETL projects would also promote more efficient energy use by moderating speeds. Decreased vehicle delay at on and off ramps would further reduce collisions and promote more efficient driving. Moreover, we're proud that we're at 70% completion for transit center expansion, 91% for BRT stations, 62% for transit service increases, 138% of planned space for park and ride expansion, and 65% completion for pedestrian and bicycle improvements. By bringing more reliable transit options to the corridor and integrating BRT into our ETL system, we have the opportunity to reduce the number of cars on the highway at peak hours, thereby reducing emissions and improving travel times. In addition to our efforts around multimodal integration and ETLs, we're moving forward on our efforts to improve traffic flow in the corridor. Currently, we're at 50% completion of local arterial improvements, 55% completion and/or funding of adding 2 additional lanes in each direction, and 35% completion or funding of direct access ramp and direct connectors. While we still have a ways to go, our program is working hard to see the master plan to completion. The vision is for an express toll lane and bus rapid transit system to help us manage traffic demand through a variety of modes, and the collective we, being WashDOT, Sound Transit, local agencies, and transportation partners, have been delivering on that master plan vision. Am I in control of the slides, Craig? Or? Oh, great, thank you. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we aim to deliver a reliable north-south alternative to Interstate 5. We look at this 50-mile corridor that you can see on the map here from a system-wide perspective and consider the performance of individual projects to the whole system as we deliver funded projects. The express toll lanes have been so popular that we have been able to build revenue and build additional projects. We were on track to deliver the next series of projects funded by toll revenue until COVID hit, which is no surprise to anybody in this room. It had some significant impacts on all funding, but particularly our bonded toll revenue funding out of our toll lanes. We've continued to work with Sound Transit on a plan to move forward. They then went through their realignment process, also related to some of those types of funding issues. And the state legislature had their own process. Now, thanks to new funding from our partners, we are back on track to deliver projects for our community. In addition to the express toll lane funding, there are a number of culverts along the corridor in need of future repair. I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with the culvert injunction and the costs and challenges associated with that. We'll continue to partner with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Muckleshoot Tribe to move forward with these environmental improvements.
Recording in progress.
So this is a pretty busy slide.
Sorry about that. The Zoom meeting died, so it came back online.
Okay, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this particular slide. There's a lot going on here, but it really does show the funding that supported our master plan delivery for the last 20 years. Fast forwarding to the end, the green bubble underneath the big green arrow is the Move Ahead Washington package that just recently passed. And I know Sound Transit had thought about trying to be here today, wasn't able to make it, but as you're well aware, the BRT system is a key component of the functioning of many of the improvements that we're doing along the corridor. It's also important to note that Sound Transit has been a key partner since the beginning of the master plan, along with other transit agencies. We collaborated with Sound Transit particularly close over the last year to align our delivery schedules. We plan to deliver a multimodal system that includes a 50-mile, 2-lane ETL and BRT system from Linwood to Burien by approximately 2025. Including multimodal connections. So Sound Transit and WashDOT partnership will implement the bus rapid transit system, designated high capacity transit on the 405 corridor, coined STRIDE, or I know they always like to point out ST Ride, which will bring bus service with 10-minute headways for most of the day. It encompasses 11 stations from Linwood to Burien, as you can see on the map. South Corridor stations, Tukwila International Boulevard Station, South Renton Transit Center, and Northeast 44th Street. This system will also include key connections with Link Light Rail. Express toll lanes and direct access will, with inline stations, play an important role in the system benefits and to the success of bus rapid transit. So switching gears a little bit to the funding challenges that we had heading into the previous ledge session, I'd like to now spend a little bit of time talking about the program's present funding and future outlook. So we entered the 2022 legislative session with a substantial funding gap. As you can see on the left side of the screen, our total program funding for 6 active projects totaled approximately $1.8 billion. However, due to impacts from COVID, the Treasurer's Office performed an analysis in December of 21 at the request of our agency, showing that there would be a gap in available toll revenue to bond. That's why on the right side of the screen, you'll see the 405-167 Corridor Financial Plan report, which addressed 2 legislative provisos. What we found in that report was that we had a funding gap of about $450 million and needed the ledge to act in 2022 to ensure that we could deliver on our projects on time. So that brings us to the 2022 budget session. The legislature filled the $450 million funding gap by passing the 2022 Supplemental Transportation Budget that helps the agency address some of our most urgent operating and maintenance needs. The $16.8 billion Move Ahead Washington package, which provided $380 million in direct funding for the 405-167 program, and an additional $70 million through House Bill 1990 for tax deferral, which, doing a little quick back of the napkin math, brings us to the $450 million. So with funding secured, we're now moving forward on multimodal focused projects that will connect communities and build a more sustainable transportation system. The delivery schedule on the bottom portion of the screen shows projects that can go to construction in 2023 as a direct result of the Moving Ahead Washington package. Additional funding was received for critical upcoming projects such as the I-405 North 8th Street project, the direct access project here in Renton, which I know everyone here knows and loves very well. So let's talk about our future funding outlook. And I know there's quite a bit going on in this slide, so I'll talk through it here. So as for the 45167 program, as we work towards bonding, we are building off of our 2021 financial plan and working with our partners at the Office of the State Treasurer and Washington State Transportation Commission to actively solidify a set of assumptions. Earlier this year, we worked with the Transportation Commission to develop a set of initial scenarios for the OST analysis that would provide a range of data for consideration. On this slide, you will see the 3 scenarios that were selected. Number 1 is the current law delivery, so essentially a baseline. Number 2 is a shift in program delivery by up to 1 year. And 3 is a shift in program delivery with a higher toll rate cap. Again, that's not something that our agency has control of. Before I walk through these scenarios individually, a few important notes. The scenarios represent a snapshot in time based on a number of assumptions. The assumptions are subject to change, and it's important to keep that in mind. The scenarios will be used to inform future financial planning efforts and do not represent the official WashDOT policy. The project delivery assumptions shown for each scenario are the only impacted projects. Schedules for projects such as North 8th and Renton to Bellevue Contract 3 remain unchanged. I'd like to provide a quick overview of each scenario analyzed by OST this summer. Scenario 1 includes assumptions as contained in the 2022 enacted supplemental budget passed by the legislature. Scenario 2 assumes an adjusted cash flow as well as a shift in project delivery to 2025 for the Renton to Bellevue project and to 2027 for the Brickyard to 527 project. And the final scenario contains the same cash flow and project delivery assumptions as scenario 2, but assumes a higher toll cap in the corridor. So with that, what did OST find? Their analysis showed that all scenarios are financially feasible given current assumptions. Further, all 3 scenarios meet the intent to deliver projects in alignment with the commencement of BRT on the corridor. That's great news. Moving forward, WashDOT and his partners at the Washington State Transportation Commission and Office of State Treasurer will continue updating assumptions and analyses in supporting of WSTC's toll rate setting process, as well as the master bond resolution adoption process. And as the analysis is updated, we will continue communicating those changes to stakeholders, including our partners here at the City of Renton. All right, and I believe we already did that.
No, I think you gotta go on. I guess that's really different. That's really different. Yeah.
And were there anything after your
No,
updates?
No,
you
that's
recall?
that slide. Different.
We ended at page 15. If you want to cover anything more after that, 16.
No, is
Where
this
do you need to
one?
be?
Looks like
Let's
the
talk about 8.
The
North 8th
the
Street.
North 8th Street.
Back button. Mouse.
let me do that for you. There you go.
All right. Well, now I'm lost.
I think no, at 8 is the one.
If you got these up, Sharif, you want to take this?
No,
This is the consequence of being late.
8, the funding for the 8. No, at 8.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for your patience. All right. So the next project we're going to cover is the North 8th Street Direct Access Project, which I know is of great interest to the city and its residents. This $250 million project is financed through toll revenue and Move Ahead Washington funds and will construct new direct access ramps at the I-405 and North 8th interchange connecting to the west side of I-405. This project will provide local connection to North 8th Street to the I-405 express toll lanes. Travelers can expect improved access and mobility in the area. The project will also address 2 fish passage barriers, one of which is Johns Creek, providing an environmental and ecological benefit to the area. Preliminary engineering for this project will begin in 2025 and is expected to be completed in 2029. We look forward to working with you as this project gets off the ground. All right, I think we're officially back on track. So last but not least, we have the SR 167 improvement projects. Funded by toll revenue and Move Ahead Washington, the next major project for the South End is the $88 million SR 167 corridor improvement project. This project will bring benefits to the corridor by adding strategic capacity on southbound 167 and by providing system-wide consistency for travelers. This project will upgrade the toll system on SR 167 to match the I-405 system, including photo tolling and destination pricing. This procurement for the design build project is slated to start in the near term, and the team had a voluntary submitters meeting for the project on Tuesday, October 18th. The project is anticipated to be awarded in the first half of 2023 and open to traffic in 25. Another busy slide, a lot going on here. So you'll see the delivery schedule for upcoming construction along 405-167. I'm not going to get into a line-by-line detail because that would take half the night. But as you can see, we'll be delivering a lot of work in the next 5 to 7 years, thanks to significant investment from our partners. And I'll just add that in addition to investment, just the support of our partners, the support of the city of Renton has been outstanding. And that is my last slide. Thank you. And we're more than happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Sharif. It'll please you know I was also stuck in 405 traffic on my way here, which is why which you did not realize because I only walked in a few moments before you did. So, so thank you to Councilmember Perez for getting us going for tonight. And it was not lost on me either that all these projects we're talking about probably would have expedited my getting here. When I left Bothell, I think I was supposed to be here 10 minutes before the meeting started, and that quickly deteriorated. So, with that, can we jump in? Do we have any questions from anyone tonight?
President.
Yes.
Based on your last slide, and I know that Soundtrans is not here, but probably you can answer this question for me. It say that in 2026, 2027 is when they're going to be building the Sound Transit BRT, or this one is going to be here already?
Essentially, the plan is to have it delivered in 27. So the North End project would be wrapping up in 27, and then that would be followed with the Sound Transit project to install the BRT stations. And so they would directly follow the infrastructure that we're building.
I have a follow-up
Yes,
question.
please.
I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember when the Sound Transit 3 was going to be put out for the voters, they promised a day for the BRT to be delivered. Do you remember which year it was?
I don't recall, no. And unfortunately, I can't speak for Sound Transit. But
Yeah, no, I know. It's unfortunately that they are not here. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? We might be letting you off the hook easy tonight. I don't know. I think that was, it was all very well covered. The slide, I guess I would go back to, I want to make sure I understood everything right. And there was a slide 10, which showed the different scenarios. I was trying to understand the differences mostly between the second and third ones, because they both show, one shows the existing cap and one shows the higher cap, and they show the same project delivery dates. I think what I missed was the exact difference in those, other than one was going to have a higher toll cap. Was that showing that there wasn't necessarily a benefit to the higher toll cap? I guess that's what I was trying to glean from that.
yeah, essentially, we were trying to figure out if a higher toll cap would make a big difference or not.
No.
And that was one of the bigger questions that we had. And essentially, all of them met our needs. So
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something more subtle there. Thank you.
that was also a question to make sure that we could answer to the Transportation Commission.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very unfortunately that we were all cashing on the toll lanes, right? That we were like, oh, we're making money out of there, and now the pandemic hit, and now that money, will come back. I hope so. I do remember that it was an agreement that the revenue that is collected from the express toll lanes should stay on the 405. Okay, so that is the plan for the future as well,
That
right?
is, yes. Yeah, I believe it's a requirement of our toll bonding that it stays within the corridor.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Question, and you better believe if there were toll lanes between Bellevue and Renton, I would have been in them tonight. So, All right. If there are no other questions, thank you very much for being here tonight. I appreciate the presentation and the updates and look forward to these projects continuing to materialize into existence. So we'll excuse you at this time, and you're welcome to stick around or and hear our legislative update, or I'll be off on your way. Sorry, Sound Transit couldn't join us as well. We'll have to look for them at a future meeting, perhaps. So next item I have on the agenda is a legislative update, and for that, for our 2023 legislative agenda, I'm going to call up Doug Levy and Dave Foster.
Good evening, Mr. President and council members and others in the audience. Thanks for having us tonight. I'm Doug Levy, Regional State Federal Affairs Consultant for the city. Pleased to be before you to cover both the 2023 state legislative agenda, and as well we'll give a quick pass to the regional and federal affairs agendas we have in your packet. I'd like to start off tonight by introducing to the right of me Mr. David Foster, who's going to be on overlap with me in November, December, and then in January, as I transition away from just about 30 years in the lobbying world and onto other things, David is going to take over as the contract state lobbyist for the city of Renton. I think you'll be in really good hands. David brings more than 2 decades of direct lobbying experience. He's done work for local governments, including at the current time, the city of Tukwila, so he knows our local legislators. He's part of a team that covers King County, so he has a good feel for legislators throughout the county's delegation, and someone who's done a lot of good work over the years. So I'd like to introduce David. And David, I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for allowing me to listen in as Doug is presenting the legislative agenda that has been developed and you all are going to look at and, of course, decide upon at some point in the very near future. I look forward to working with all of you. I look forward to working for you and with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or at your convenience, set up time to sit down with you on an individual basis. Thank you.
And if I could, tonight we'll pretty much cover the priority issues in the legislative agenda, but know that this belongs to all of you. So we're presenting it tonight for committee of the whole, and then it's scheduled to be in front of full council for adoption on the 14th. And so we very much want to hear your input, and that'll allow us to consider any adjustments to the agenda document between now and then. Maybe just before we get into what's in front of you, just for context, remember that we're going into a 2023 legislative session, which will be a longer session of the legislature, 105 days. That's the odd numbered years they do their longer sessions, as opposed to 60 in the even election years. Unlike cities like ours and local governments throughout the state, the legislature doesn't have everything blended into one budget. They have 3 distinct budgets. So they will adopt 2-year operating, capital, and transportation budgets come next year. So it'll be a very big budget year. And they'll have no shortage of issues before them, whether we're talking about affordable housing or behavioral health or transportation or a slightly flatter financial outlook and maybe a recession in the near future. So a lot of challenges will be before them. This agenda that we have in front of you is designed to really talk about where we will focus Renton's energies the most and be the most active, or just outright lead on issues that pertain to the city individually. So just to start through this one, for First, on what we've annually talked about as a quality of life plank of the agenda, we're proposing a capital budget request for the pavilion building in the downtown. And this is one where we hope that the federal government's yin can be joined by the state government's yang, if you will. We're working with Senator Murray's office and Congressman Adam Smith's office on a $1.5 million earmark for the renovation of the interior of the pavilion building, which is almost 20 years now since the city acquired it as a former auto dealership. And the idea of making that a more vibrant, open building with business incubator space for women and minority-owned and historically disadvantaged businesses to hopefully get to exhibit their wares. So really exciting project to reactivate and energize that building. And assuming the federal government adopts appropriation bills before the end of the year, then we're in good shape for the $1.5 million on the interior. This capital budget would be dealing with the public square and the festival street that the city is looking to activate on the outside of the pavilion building, you know, in that space where, as you all know, for example, the farmers market is held and is very successful. So thinking about picnic benches and play space and children's games and all those things that would make that a central heartbeat part of the downtown. So we have the notion of up to $1 million for designing all of that public square and festival street space, and $1 million to start on some of the more straightforward construction parts of that. So that's the capital budget request. In the meantime, we also have on the list repurposing a prior capital budget allocation that we worked with then Representative Eric Pettigrew on in 2020. At that time, we were looking at using the St. Vincent de Paul space at the north end of the city on Rainier Avenue and leasing some space and doing tenant improvements and making that the site of a feeding program, cold weather shelter, and the like. That didn't end up working out. There were a couple of other fits and starts, and now one of the things that the city is looking at doing, as you know from our 1590 conversations, is taking that 300 building area at the edge of the airport and demolishing that building, bringing in a modular unit, using that for behavioral health services, emergency shelter, feeding program, and the like. And so the state is already going to be in the mode of reappropriating those $206,000 funds, but we'll need to work with our area legislators on specific language in the capital budget that speaks to the purpose we have in mind today. So that's what that item is about. We think it should be a pretty straightforward item, but something that we will need to activate with our legislators. And then the next one down is something that Doug Baldwin and his foundation have approached legislators on. As you well know, the Family First Community Center up in the Benson Cascade Benson Hill neighborhood is under construction, underway. There is a gap overall, though, in the capital funding for the facility, and so Mr. Baldwin has talked to some area legislators who want to work on capital budget funding for that, and we want to be supportive of that request. It won't be a City of Renton request per se, but we would be proposing to be supportive of that with those legislators working on it. And then lastly, we know of some legislators, in particular Representative Tina Orwell, who may be working on capital budget monies tied to the 988 crisis response line that got underway last July. And a next step with the 988 service is to build round-the-clock crisis centers. And there has been discussion of possibly locating one of those somewhere in South King County. If that's the case, we've met with Representative Orwell. We feel like that's very much in line with our thinking around public safety and behavioral health to be very supportive of that effort. So that's a rundown on the sort of quality of life capital budget side. Moving on to public safety, one of the items we have as a key priority involves what a lot of people shorthand as the Blake legislation. You may remember that in the 2021 session, the state legislature, in response to a case called Blake versus State of Washington that dealt with knowingly or unknowingly possessing drugs, a case that went against the state of Washington. The legislature made an attempt to put in place a new law and a new approach around drug possession, drug offenses. That was Senate Bill 5476, adopted in 2021. And the legislature, I think very consciously at the time, also sunsetted that statute on June 30th, 2023. So there's common knowledge that the 23 legislature is going to go in, revisit that statute, make some changes to it. Exactly what changes the legislature makes, I think, is going to be the subject of some debate. In our case, Mayor Pavone, working with a number of other South King County mayors, has come up with what we would call sort of a middle of the road approach, if you will, between what's more on the decriminalization side that a committee appointed by the legislature has recommended, and on the other side of the spectrum, a keep it as a felony, return it to what it was before the Blake case approach. What several of the South King County mayors and others in areas like Snohomish County are suggesting is rather than head toward either end of the spectrum, maybe find some place in the middle that adds accountability to the statute, that gives law enforcement the tools to take someone into custody, whether that looks like a gross misdemeanor or a misdemeanor, steer them into the court system where we know that they can get assigned treatment services and the help they need, offer a deferred sentence, reward those who go through a treatment plan. So that's the idea that a number of jurisdictions are working on. I think this is similar to what, if you've looked at the Association of Washington Cities legislative agenda, that they're discussing. Part of this also would involve more robust funding for the courts, because all of this imagines a stronger role for the courts, and particularly those therapeutic community drug courts like we have in the city of Renton. I'll go through in a little more detail what we've fleshed out on that topic, but that's one of our proposed priority items. The other is something you've seen virtually every year that I've been representing you all, and that is making sure that there's adequate funding for both the basic law enforcement academies and support for something that the governor is bringing forward, the idea of regional academies to help relieve some of the stress on the academy in Burien. And the governor's proposal, for example, would add academies in places like Everett and Pasco so that there could be more physical locations to carry out the training of newly hired officers, which is something our state requires under the law. So we want to be supportive of that, as well as other investments in public safety and criminal justice, whether that's things like body camera funding or police hiring and retention incentives. So we have that all as a suite of things on a priority list. And then, again, I mentioned earlier the 988 crisis response system. There's going to be additional legislation to clarify how all that rolls out. And we think that's something well worth being supportive of. Moving down to transportation infrastructure, you just got a very thorough briefing, obviously, from our colleagues with the Washington State Department of Transportation. And you heard a little bit about the 16-year, $16.9 billion Move Ahead Washington package. We felt very good about that package for the most part. And some of you were directly involved. All of you, I think, had meetings with our legislators pushing for money to keep all of the 405 projects on track, which Move Ahead Washington did, both through the $380 million that DOT showed you and a sales tax deferral bill worth about $70 million. And that'll enable this 405 North 8th direct access ramp, which we've been waiting for in Renton for the better part of 2.5 decades to come online in the next few years. So that's wonderful. And there was also funding to extend the East Rail corridor down to Renton. So that was another win from the package. But one of the things that fell out of the package that we think is still vitally important, and Councilmember Perez, it goes to your question about the delivery date for bus rapid transit. When the south part of the Stride line between Bellevue and Burien comes online in 2026, there's only going to be one place in the system with what we call an offline station, where the buses will leave the express toll lanes and they'll have to go to a station, pick up, drop off, and come back. And that's that 405 167 area where the South Renton Transit Center is. And we're very worried about that because we want bus rapid transit to be successful, and that's going to involve efficient travel times. And we worry about that slog that the buses are going to have to go through when they leave the 405 express toll lanes and have to navigate that very short but very tough stretch on Rainier to Rainier and Grady, where the transit center is going to be located at the old Sound Ford site, which you're very well acquainted with. So we had talked to legislators about some type of an overcrossing to make that a more direct path for BRT buses. I think legislators were interested, but they were a little nervous about bringing new projects into Move Ahead Washington. They were more geared toward keeping all of the other 405 corridor investments on track. So this one fell through the cracks a little bit, and we are now suggesting that for a couple $1 million, there's a way to get a study and data and analysis done that will enable a consensus solution for that area. One option, for example, that's gotten some early back of the napkin work is an overcrossing of Rainier at Grady that could save up to 4 minutes travel time in the AM and PM peak hours. So we want to have some work done so that when BRT service is underway, and frankly, when the legislators are coming back to their next decisions and discussions around a revenue package, we have something that's designed and ready to go at that interchange. And I will share with you that the mayor has led briefings and tours for both the Senate and House transportation chairs, some of the vice chairs. The council president's been good enough to join us on a couple of those, and we've had very good receptivity from the legislators about the need to do something there. And seeing is really believing. I think the legislators have been able to look at just how tough a path it is for the buses under the current conditions to get from 405 167 over to that station and back. So I think we have hopefully some goodwill built up on that effort to secure some early money to study an ultimate solution at that area. The other thing we have on our list, frankly, is that Move Ahead Washington was passed by the legislature, enacted by the legislature, but a lot of the decisions around how to sequence active transportation and transit-related projects in particular were left for the coming session. And that's because a lot of those projects are dependent on something called the Climate Commitment Act, where the legislature did forecasting of how much revenue they were going to get, but they really didn't at the time know exactly how much revenue was going to come in the door. And so 2023 was left as the session where all of those projects would be sequenced and scheduled over the 16-year period. And I think the good news is that the legislature is now forecasting that this Climate Commitment Act money is actually going to come in higher than first projected. So that's good news, but there's still going to be very few folks going to the legislature and saying, hey, can you leave my project to years 13, 14, 15, and 16, right? I mean, most everybody will be saying, our project is really important, schedule it right away. So in particular, for us working with our colleagues in areas like King County and Bellevue and Redmond and Kirkland, we want to make sure that those East Rail Corridor investments that are on the active transportation list can get done as early as possible. So we've got that flagged as a priority item on the agenda. And then last, but certainly not at all least, we've listed again, we established a racial justice and equity plank to the legislative agenda for the last few years, which we have on our list so that we can be able to be nimble and supportive of a whole variety of efforts to do work around affordable housing, work around social justice, helping those vulnerable citizens and in need citizens in our community. So in past years, that's been things like the Governor's Office of Equity and making sure that was adequately funded and off the ground and underway. It's been things like housing benefit districts, which got on the docket in 2022 but didn't pass. So we have a few things called out for this coming session. Again, strong support of housing benefit districts, the idea of bumping up the funding in the Housing Trust Fund, and taking the existing surplus property statutes that give first dibs for government-owned surplus property to affordable housing and adding affordable home ownership to affordable housing. So those are a few things. But frankly, this plank also allows us to work with our area legislators and be supportive of racial justice and equity initiatives that they may have underway as well. And remember, when I say our legislators, in past sessions, as you all know, our legislators has meant anywhere from 15 to 18 members from various districts. Under redistricting, we now have a more compact number of legislators who have Renton physically in their district. Most of Renton is in the 11th district, and a little bit of Renton remains in the 5th legislative district. So the other thing I'll call to your attention is that in the back of your packet, we have a more robust write-up of our efforts around Blake, the creation of that public square and Festival Street around the Pavilion building, and the transportation infrastructure items. I won't go into excruciating detail on those, but happy to answer any questions. And then I'll briefly mention that on the regional and federal affairs side, if you've looked at the packet, those are a little more on the 20,000 foot level, but they describe a variety of areas where we think it's important for us to be a voice and a seat at the table at both the regional and federal level. So with that, let me pause, entertain any questions you may have, any input you may have on this item. And again, while we didn't cover, a variety of things where we'll jump in and support others or help others oppose things or track things, that's part of the agenda as well, and we're happy to answer any questions about those items on the back page, if you will, of the 23 state legislative agenda.
Thank you very much, Doug. That was a lot of information, as there always is. There's always a lot on our plate going into every session. So, and this year, it looks like we will still have a lot on our plate. So that is good. So do we have questions from folks? Councilmember Halloran.
I actually have 3 questions, but I'll just kind of go and please feel free, if this is not the right venue for these questions, just say so. So in general, I thought 300 Rainier, the issue with 300 Rainier is its non-compliant use of airport property. Is that still true? Why would we be investing money in a modular facility in an area that's non-compliant use?
Well, I might invite Martin Pestuccio, the Public Works Administrator, to answer that one. I think we've gotten some additional guidance since then that gives us a little bit more ease of mind about proceeding.
Thank you. Thanks, Councilmember Halloran. We've been looking at that from a perspective of the 300 Rainier is part of the airport parcel, meaning it's on airport land, and so any use of that land is subject to the FAA regulations regarding airport use. But that land is not considered aviation property in that it's not contiguous to the runways or taxiways, and there's no direct connection. It's a separate elevation. It's got a road in between it, the perimeter road around the airport. And so that land could be used for other purposes. But there's really no aviation use that looks to need that particular parcel of land right now. So we've looked at that. It's been used as a Chamber of Commerce building, as you're aware of, in the past. And so use other than aviation can be there. The one caveat would be any aviation or any use of that land would have to generate revenue that would be paid back to the airport fund. So that land could be used for an alternative purpose, such as commercial, or for a purpose such as the service center that the city's proposing at 300 years night. Just the city would have to pay the airport fund for the land use of that particular parcel. And we're in ongoing discussions with the FAA about that now.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Additional question?
Did you have two more questions, Councilmember Rahal?
But I want to give everybody else an opportunity to speak. Okay, well, thank
Continue
you.
on, Councilmember Howell.
Just in general, what is the feeling of what is the difference with Blake? How are we distinguishing how we treat alcohol from how we treat drugs? Why is there such a sort of a disconnect between those two substance abuse cultures in our community?
I don't know that I'm the subject matter expert to give you a perfect answer to that question, but what the legislature did was look at drug offenses, drug possession under the law in response to the court case. And then they designed an approach that called for at least 2 diversions for the first 2 offenses, and then up to a prosecutor on third and subsequent offenses. So I think our law enforcement folks and a number of other law enforcement folks are very worried that those diversions are not leading to anything, that for folks who are offered diversion, they're often not getting into any system of help or care.
Let me clarify. It's my understanding that you can't be drunk and disorderly in public,
Correct.
but you can openly use felony drugs and be disorderly in public. That's what I don't get.
Yeah, the legislature set up a separate approach around drug offenses, if you will, as part of its response to that Supreme Court case. So that's the distinction. There are other laws that remain on the books, obviously, around things like criminal trespass. But for drug offenses, there was a new approach carved out by the legislature.
Thank you.
Great. Since we jumped onto Blake, I think we're going to go to Councilmember Rivera and then Councilmember Perez.
Yes, I appreciate this amazing legislation packet. I appreciate the time that we took earlier today to chit chat. A couple of concerns I have when we get into the nitty gritty of your explanation of the Blake decision. In the third paragraph on, I don't think there's page numbers to this, but it's on the first page of the Blake, the reform, urging reform for the Blake legislation. It says, unfortunately, Renton and many other cities are experiencing significant increase in criminal activity since the enactment of ESB 5476. The statute is not working, either in protecting public safety or in providing treatment and services to those who need it. That, I believe, that paragraph lingers on misinformation because you're assuming there possibly is a correlation between the rise in crime we're seeing now and the passage of Blake, and we don't have the data or the information to deduce that. I think it's bordering on inaccurate because there's a lot of factors that are going into the increase in crime that we are currently seeing. Wouldn't you agree?
Appreciate the input.
Anytime.
And I know, if I could add quickly, had a chance to talk to Councilmember Rivera, and one of the things that I know Councilmember Rivera brought up when we chatted this afternoon is the lack of any kind of database or tracking among and betwixt jurisdictions, and so that's something we called out in the narrative, but that I think Councilmember Rivera suggested could be a little more explicitly listed as one of the toolbox items. So I took that input into
I have a couple
account.
questions, but you can come back to me.
Go ahead, Councilmember Perez, and then we can come back.
Oh, thank you very much for your presentation, David. Nice to meet you. I think we have met before. Yeah, my husband was very good friends of your dad. You know, my name is Ruth Perez Ralston, so you may know that. So welcome to the team. I'm very happy that you are joining us, and Doc, we're gonna really miss you. You were Renton. Everybody walk, and you knew that you were Renton in Olympia. So I really like your legislative agenda. I think it's a very well put document. I'm very supportive of the legislative agenda as it is. I'm especially proud of you adding the support to the 988, specifically with the conversations that we're having right now with the Valleycom. I think in the past, we have been very supportive of the individual efforts of Representative Orwell, you know, specifically the effort that Renton put to help her with the rape kit. It was not part of our agenda, and we decided to put it there because it was so important for us. So this speaks volumes that we are putting effort on this. Assuming that you have been meeting with our legislations and beyond, that's the way I'm going to say it right now, about the possibility of this will be our agenda for the future, considering that they are right now working on the bills they're going to put together for next year. I want to know if you can share with us what has been the response of our legislators to this proposed agenda, and if we have received any pushback from them, or if they think that is something that they can help us during 2023.
Councilmember Perez, to clarify, are you is your question on the 988 or everything on our
Everything
agenda?
in the proposed agenda, the basics, you know.
I think we've had very good feedback from our legislators. We've met with all three of the folks in the 11th, and we've met on parts of this with our folks in the 5th as well. We'll get into more sit-down meetings in earnest after we have an approved legislative agenda for you all, but certainly on things like the capital items, the 988, the transportation, and the Blake overall approach. We've had very good feedback from our area legislators. I would say that on the Blake issue, it's not a monolith among our 11th district legislators. I would say, for example, that where Senator Hasagawa is and where Representatives Hackney and Berquist are is not an exact match. So as I shared at the outset, there are a variety of opinions on Blake, and it'll be a very interesting debate throughout the session on that one.
I have a really quick follow-up on your answer. I'm looking forward to see what is Senator Spock Hasagawa position. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you so much, Doug, for the presentation. Very informative and thoroughly put together. So thank you. I guess in terms of, for me, I'm very much appreciative of the transportation infrastructure, making sure that we're not going to be the 14th or the 16th year project, especially with Northeast 8th and just overall what we've lost in Renton. And my pet peeve is just Renton being a pass-through city, right? And as we've gotten to know in our fair share. Right? We're not asking for more, we're asking for our fair share. So I very much appreciate that. In terms of the elephant in the room, or what is not necessarily the elephant because it's already been brought up, but I think the Blake legislation, I don't know, I know that you have met with legislators. I wonder if it would be helpful for council as a whole to have a meeting prior to the adoption to kind of have some clarity or ask questions to those who have worked on the legislation. And it just, I think that here and there we're meeting through different venues, but not all at in one space. So I don't know if that's something that is of interest to council, or if it's something that is possible with has it been done in the past, or kind of just open-ended? Just don't know if we've done that before.
So, Councilmember Van, I can't tell if you're talking about a desire on your part for the council to sit down with our area legislators or those who are maybe playing a committee chair or lead role on things like the Blake legislation, or both.
I think a combination, or just kind of just throwing out there for other council members if they have any interest in that, for clarity and for understanding, right? It seems like we're not all on the same page. And what I see is what's actually implemented in downtown Renton. That's my lived experience. That's our neighbors' lived experience. And what's going on now is not helping our city. And I think what's going to help is for us to understand as policymakers to hear what is not necessarily the intent, but what is actually the impact, right, to the city and how we can actually fix. I am in support of the agenda that we have been talking about in the legislative agenda that we're going to be voting on next week. But I think just for clarity and just giving that opportunity if other council members are interested.
Because if we wanted to let folks weigh in on that thought real quick, I would say it seems an appropriate discussion. Suggestion. Obviously, we would have to notice it if there was 4 or more of us, as far as being a public meeting. It seemed not so dissimilar. I think maybe you might be suggesting to what we may have done with a transportation proposal, where we might do a little walking tour or something, where we could have that, here's what's going on approach. So others, yeah.
My input is obviously we cannot take a vote in the cow, but my input is I don't think we can do that previous to passing the agenda because we are such a short period of time. And I know that legislators right now, specifically our legislators, are very, very busy. But I will be very interested, Doug, and I don't think we have done it in the past, to meet before they go to Olympia, meeting from now to December 15, to see if at least we can meet with the 3 for the 11th. And my take on this is because I don't want to happen to us what happened in the past, that we go and lobby our legislators and they already signed for a bill that we're trying to kill or is in opposition of what we are doing. I want to be sitting down with her. This is what Renton we are going to be lobbying. Where are you on this? And I know that you guys have already taken the temperature, but I think it's a good idea that before we go to Olympia, you just take their temperature, before they're super busy, and just have the 15 minutes in their office that we are just telling them 2 things and then we have to run after. But I don't know if that's a possibility or not. I will be interested on that.
I could jump in real quick and throw out, would committee days be a possibility for something like that? That would be us going down there to them. Would there be an advantage, I suppose, would be the question I would ask back, to getting in prior to the session starting? I assume we would already have our agenda adopted by then, as you said, but at least we'd get clarity from where their positions are on that, and we could fine tune if we needed.
Yep. So, Mr. President, the legislature will have its assembly days December 1st and 2nd. So that would be a couple of day period where you'd have them all in one place at one time, if you will. So the other thing, obviously, we're whispering about is, there's also the possibility of inviting them to a future council meeting. Doesn't necessarily give you the maybe ease of dialogue that you might wish to have on an issue like this, but we can take a look at a couple ways for you to have FaceTime. I'm hearing Councilmember Perez's point before the session kicks into gear.
Councilmember Albertson?
First off, Councilmember Van, thanks for bringing it up because I think it is a good idea, and your refinement, Councilmember Perez. So I'm in support of that, and I just want to kind of weigh in that I like the overall agenda. I'm fully in support of what you're suggesting with the reform of the Blake legislation, and to I guess the point I wanted to make was if we can somehow make that, I'd like to be able to have an opportunity to truly understand not only the intent, but the perception and everything, and quite frankly, maybe hold their feet to the fire as to, hey, what are you going down representing? You're representing us. Where does this come from? What agenda are you on? All that kind of good stuff. So I want to underscore that if we can make that happen in any kind of way possible, then that would be great. And if it's in this setting, I think, quite frankly, the public would like to. have the opportunity to hear and see that, because quite frankly, I don't think they do in any appreciable form.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Councilmember Halloran. I did not forget about you. I was just going through the queue.
Yeah. So I just want to circle back on follow up to Councilmember Rivera's question. Is it possible from the RRFA and RPD to get post ESB 5476 response data? Can we get that data?
The difficulty, Councilmember O'Halloran, is the data that our law enforcement folks can get for Renton and the data overall. I think one, on that first part, our police have tried to keep track, and on the downtown emphasis that we describe in the two-pager, they they have some data points. Overall, it's very difficult because there is no system in place beyond a single jurisdiction.
So yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I should clarify. What I'm interested in is not necessarily who, but what and when in the city of Renton.
If I may clarify, the crime, like the crime rate specifically?
Our first responders, what are the types of calls they are responding to in Renton post ESB 5476? Whether it's coming out of Valleycom or whether it's, the post encounter write up, I would be very curious to see what types of calls we're actually responding to as compared to pre ESB 5476.
So I've taken note of that. I think we'll have to go back and ask the question, but happy to do that.
If it's possible. Thank you very much.
Great question. It would be very good to know. Absolutely. All right. Councilmember Rivera.
Glad you remembered my name, Council President Gervin. My follow-up, I probably am in the minority of those that don't agree with your assessment with the Blake decision, but also I'm the only one with a criminal justice master's degree and has studied these things in terms and worked in a correctional setting to understand that the voluntary approach, and I don't particularly like the verbiage of moving away from the voluntary approach. I see your compromise here, and I love the table that's been given. And I do think the Blake decision and having 3 referrals with absolutely no tracking system was a complete mistake. If the legislator was going to put in a tracking, or to say there were 3 referrals, they should have had a tracking system at least at a regional or county level for us to track those people. So that could have been an actual 3-strike kind of deal. That was the first mistake. But the proposed legislation I don't find to be as much of a compromise because it goes from non-custodial voluntary measures, which have been proven in the data to be more effective when it comes to reducing recidivism and actually criminal dissent, which is the stoppage of criminal behavior. But it goes directly into custodial intervention, and we understand that contact with the criminal justice system increases one likelihood to reoffend, and that is just basic. And so I would love to see a real compromise where maybe there is a first referral and then the second results in a diversion, or as first in diversion, the second is the dispositional alternative. Because what I'm hearing and seeing here is the language around diversion and dispositional alternatives, which I completely agree with, but I don't want us to fall back into the war on drug verbiage and the war on drug idea, because we have seen what it is to incarcerate and adjudicate people who have addictions. We've seen it for the last almost 40 years, and it hasn't been the most effective because here we are again. And I don't think we've given Blake the time, but also I will say when it comes to the resources, we haven't given the resources either. I would love to see more language around asking for more money and finances in terms of treatment programs specifically located in the city of Renton and the region. That's where I would like us to put that direction, is asking for more services to support Blake, asking for a better tracking system, especially between our regional partners to support Blake. But I don't want to see our first interaction to result in an arrest. I don't think that's a compromise here.
Councilmember Paris.
Mr. President, may I? In this point, I may disagree with you, not 100%. And I don't believe that we have to have a criminal degree. I also don't have an engineer degree. I also don't have a lawyer degree. And that my voice as a council member, I don't think is as valuable, depending on the degree that we have. However, I have been listening to our police department. I have been listening to our constituents, and I'm very, very concerned. I am not sure if the Blake decision has any impact of the level of crime that we have today. I don't think so, to be honest with you. But I do have to say that I have heard our police department. And for me, more than anything, I am assuming that this is the ask of our staff. I know that our legislative agenda is not, you don't make it out of what you think. I know that you meet with each one of our administrators one-on-one for several months before you put together this document. And I am assuming that this is the ask of our police department. And I want to be very supportive of them. Not that I don't believe, Councilmember Rivera, that having a restorative justice process is the right thing to do. And not that I don't believe that they ask for support our courts
Recording in
and specifically the work
progress.
that we're doing here is incredibly important. And with that, emphasizing that I do believe that people that use drugs need medical attention, and that's what I think we should be lobbying for. But at the same time, I do believe that we have to provide the tools to our police department and as well the support of our community that they are asking for. And that is my position on this.
Can I have a point of clarification, please, Council President?
Real quick on that, and then I'm going to go down the line to Councilmember Vaughn and Councilmember Albertson.
I absolutely meant no disrespect. We all have our strengths, and what I mean is, I literally just taught a class on restorative justice and on strengths-based approaches to addiction recovery. It meant no disrespect, but I read studies. I've done the research and have the background in terms of what works and what doesn't. It meant no disrespect into what our areas. But Councilmember Holler has an incredible background in finance, which is why she has such a strength on the finance committee. We all have our strengths. Councilmember Vaughn is a lawyer, and she's able to see things from a more legal approach. It was not to mean that nothing is there is less of value here. I just think I'm looking at this possibly through a more academic lens because of my background.
Councilmember Vaughn?
Sorry,
I was working my way down the line.
I didn't know. Okay,
You're
I
next.
didn't even
You're
listen. I
next.
thought you were looking at me. Forgive me.
Thank you, Councilmember Perez. Yes, I am an attorney and I did practice criminal law, which I don't want to mention. I think it's really my lived experience, my neighbor's lived experience, and how this policy is the impact of it. I don't know how many of our council members go to Safeway, like I say, in downtown, shopping at small businesses. I understand institutionalized racism. I understand what it is, but I also want to know if we're able to get clarity and really understand ourselves what this means impacting our city. Right? And as a criminal law attorney for short-lived, that is, practicing over 10 years. But really, if there is no incentive for an individual, if there's no tracking system at this point, we are in an urgent need right now, where the state level doesn't have a tracking system. We don't have the tracking system. How are we going to be able to afford the support for our vulnerable population, our businesses, our unsheltered neighbors and our residents, right? So you have to look at the courts is going to provide that. And when you get an arrest, you get a criminal complaint, it's really you're actually going to go through the process to get the treatment. You can get deferred, you can get all the diversion programs. So I think, of course, I'm not advising anybody. I'm just saying from my lived experience, and I think that why I support this and how we should understand and have clarity of what works for our town. And so, thank you.
Albertson.
Thank you. So I'm not going to even try and be as eloquent and as fancy as my council members next to me here. With all due respect, I 100% disagree with Councilmember Rivera. She knows that.
Proudly.
And sometimes what can be helpful can be a hindrance, and academia is wonderful, but sometimes when you look through a lens and you're trying to get everything just right and you're basing that on versus what you see in front of your eyes, sometimes that can be an issue. What I'm going by and basing this is from conversation with the RIPD and the simple numbers of how many people police have contacted in their interactions. 350 people offered intervention. 10, fewer than 10 agreed. I don't need 5 years of data to tell me initially that, and plus with just lived experience, somebody who is not in the right state of mind due to substances and that sort of thing, the data may say that voluntary stuff works. Yeah, when voluntary actions are actually taken. But the problem here is the voluntary actions aren't taken. And I don't think we get to that. Why I like your proposed legislation is I'm a believer that if I'm really trying to help somebody, then I have to intervene and help them. I can't wait for them to say, yeah, you know what? Now, granted, you hit rock bottom, sure. And so the custodial intervention, I personally believe, is necessary. Arrest, maybe that's not necessarily a great word that people like, but you know what? If I'm there, somebody help me. And, I think in this whole, what we've gotten to is just everybody afraid to put a little bit of tough love into the mix if you really want to make a dent in things. So, I have to disagree that we have to get them in the setting so that now they can be in a position, as I look at the, your flow chart here and that sort of thing, to be offered, hey, with a little bit more teeth, you can do this. It's here for you. But if you don't, you can't just go back and take another hit of fentanyl and that sort of thing. That's why I like that, because there is accountability. There's no accountability right now. There's no accountability with the system, with what they've come up with. And without accountability, hey, I don't tell your kids to make the bed. If you never look in the room, don't expect the bed to be made, ever. That's my simple analogy. I'm done. Thank you.
If I could just quickly, I just wanted to make sure I was responding to something Councilmember Perez said a couple minutes ago, because I've heard the phrase "your proposal." I'll let everybody know that this is an amalgamation of meeting with departments, hearing from the chief and deputy chief, the administration, and working on a narrative and things like the flow chart that represent the mayor and the administration's take on this, an effort to put a proposal in front of you. Thank you for all the input. This is a great discussion.
I agree. It is a great discussion. And I thought I should probably take a chance to maybe weigh in a little bit myself. I know I'm really good at calling on other people, but I also have opinions from time to time. So I might share one real quick, since we've been talking about Blake, and then just so folks know where everyone's at. And I want to say, I do think we're probably a lot closer together than we realize, despite the spirited discussion. For me, where I land at is, I would love to see a scenario where voluntary could work, but I have to agree with Councilman Albertson and others. When I look out there, that's not the reality in practice. There are people who are beyond volunteer at this point. And so where I think we are finding agreement is we need better tools to get them into treatment. We need that. And the word I wrote down, and I heard it from multiple people tonight, was intervention, right? An intervention is what is needed for a lot of these folks out there who are not capable of making this decision for themselves at this point. And I do think voluntary is an approach that probably for a lot of folks would work. The folks we're hearing about right now, the folks that are visible, I think that group is probably one that we need. I don't like the term tough love necessarily, but yeah, something a little bit more impactful in order to actually get them there. So I don't know what that looks like exactly. I appreciate, Doug, that you made a very good effort to thread the needle, as it were, to find something that is palatable and possibly doable this session. It's probably not going to look anything exactly like that when it comes out of the product, but I think it's a great starting point to have this conversation. And I do appreciate what we've been contributing tonight, because I think in the end we do agree, like, it's a problem and we got to do something to address it. It's just a myriad of what is the right channel to get there. So I do appreciate, and the last thing I'll conclude with, and I'll let others speak again. I do appreciate the approach, that we're not landing further to the end. It doesn't sound like anyone's on the lock them up, the felony side of things. It sounds like, generally speaking, we're much more towards the middle approach to I think a decriminalization would be great someday. I just think the practical reality right now is just not there. So I will defer to others. Councilmember Rivera.
Thank you, Councilmember President. I love this discourse, and I think it's a great conversation, and one that I think we're seeing actually across South King County and across the country, frankly. But I do want to address, this data that says during the ongoing emphasis patrols to address the complaints, police contacted 350 people and offered drug and housing resources. Fewer than 10 agreed to the referral. Now, I get that number, right? You look at that number and you say nobody's accepting any kind of help, but they're not accepting it from police. And we have to understand that some people don't look at law enforcement and want to accept services, or are in a place with law enforcement, to accept services. And that's where I would like to go back to more social services. And again, trying to get other people, other responders on the street, not law enforcement, that can help relieve law enforcement and help provide resources for these individuals. Because when I see this number, I think that, again, there are multiple variables. It's not A plus B equals C. And that was my issue with the paragraph alluding that we're seeing this crime spike because of SB 5476. And additionally, I want us to be cautious about lived experience, because even me in academia, it's a place of privilege. A lawyer, it's a place of privilege, right? I'm going to say, having been in King County adult jail, where there is also have been incidents of drugs. I worked in a juvenile prison where we had girls that got declined into adult court and then came to Echo Glen. They would go to the adult King County jail, and there were drugs in those jails. They weren't helped with their addictions in those jails. They were still able to access drugs. And so that is my fear when we're going again to locking them up, even if it's for a low level offense. And I'm just saying, I don't like the idea of going from this 3 referral process to a 0 referral process, right? Or it's maybe not that black and white. It's a 3 referral, kind of get 1, 2, 3, get out of jail free card or whatever, to this custodial intervention. I would still like to see a step to diversion, dispo, etc. And if we're going to go the custodial route at all.
Councilmember Halloran, and I'm just going to keep working my way back.
Thank you, Council President. And again, to follow up on what Councilmember Rivera just said, I think it is the strong intent of our upcoming budget that we're going to be passing, that we are going to be standing up that navigation team,
Yep.
different responders, and maybe we'll see a change in those numbers. And hopefully we'll see a change in those numbers. But that is the intent of that navigation team that we have so far, looks like we're going to be approving. So.
I think, Councilmember Halloran mentioned what I wanted to say, but just in terms of, we were mentioning about lived experience, it's not just my own lived experience, and I never mentioned about me being an attorney until you guys talk about profession, because that's not me, but I'm talking about lived experience of our neighbors in downtown. People who are impacted in downtown. And as if you have the opportunity, I would encourage our council members to shop at Safeway at 11 at night, at 10 at night, or when the sun's down, or walk the street, right? Or drive midnight, drive around town. And it's not just, it's not us versus them. That's not ever our intent as a city. And it's really helping our neighbors. But when we have folks who are on the shelter, folks who are on chemical dependency, folks who are of not sound mind, and folks who are traffickers, not just drug trafficking, but potentially human trafficking. I think that's a huge concern for our city, and we have to really understand the lived experience of our neighbors and the surrounding businesses, right? It's not just my own lived experience. And so let's look at the impacted communities, who's been impacted in our policy. And I think it's really getting our heads out of the clouds and really walking the streets and seeing what it is.
Councilmember Perez.
Thank you, Councilmember Van. And I do agree with the president on this about his approach. And what I love this discussion, at the end of the day, it's not going to be our job to fix or change Blake. That's the legislative job. Our job here is to see if we're going to support or we're not going to support the efforts of the legislation on what they're going to bring for what they call fixing the Blake decision. So I will encourage all the council members that believe that this agenda is something that is not palatable to, no, I don't know. I'm trying to say words that not even in Spanish, I know. So my strong, I always like to represent Renton with one voice, especially when we go to Olympia to our legislators. But I do understand that it's very hard to try to advocate for something that you don't believe on. So I encourage everybody that disagree with their agenda when the report comes next week, that they express their opinions and the vote will reflect where their heart is. And that way we understand that right now we are not fixing Blake. We will agree with some things and other things, but it's not our job. It's actually the legislation job. Although you disagree with me though. in my approach.
Doug's job to fix it. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's David's job.
David's job to
David's
fix it.
job. You can't vote now.
Councilmember Albertson, did you have a?
I am all out.
All right. Well, just to do a quick time check, I think this again has been a very good conversation on this as we're working towards crafting this agenda. I do want to know if there were questions on other parts outside of Blake, specifically before we do adjourn, because I did have a couple other ones, although I thought that was the right spot to focus for sure. So I'm glad we did focus discussion there, but I want to make sure we do make room for the other areas of the agenda. If anyone wanted to jump in on that. Yeah, if
No,
you
do
could
you
go for it.
have?
I do, but
Go.
okay, well now it just feels out of place. But I was just curious on the pavilion on the Piazza Park. Just wanted to make sure for clarity, did that include Gateway Park as well? Was it that as far as the scope goes and or the Big Five site, or what was the scope of that plan specifically, or is it specifically just Piazza Park?
The scope is, I mean, part of what we would intend to do is use the $1 million of pre-construction money to iron out the exact design and how far we can go, frankly. Because some of the earlier estimates that date all the way back to the Civic Core plan are much higher. So we've talked about using $1 million of the $2 million to really nail down the design and the scope, and the other $1 million to do early win construction.
Yeah, coming back to what Councilmember Van mentioned, the transportation package. For me, this is very, very important. You know how important it is. I was barely 2 months a council member when I went to Olympia to advocate for this. In my vision, and I have had this conversation with Martin over and over, I had nightmares thinking that what can happen to that Rainier location when BRT comes. I mean, it's very stressful. By the time that we were advocated for this, very passionate, I think we were thinking on downtown, we were thinking on bringing BRT because we were not getting anything, and the light rail and all this, the study of the light rail, but now the location, it's now an eye-opening that, wow, are we bringing to our city? So I will be very, very, very interested, Doug, to really do a one-on-one lobbying on this if you need me, or David, if you need me. I go all the way to Olympia if you really need me for this, because the money for us, for the BRT, since we are not having a light rail, it freaks me out every single time that I see, oh, we're adding more for the light rail here, and are we going to do it faster, and we're going to deliver faster in Kirkland and Redmond, and well, we not getting anything, barely a BRT, and we're still having a problem with this. But now the BRT is coming and it's going to create more problems for our city. That solution, that is freaking me out. So thank you for that in the agenda, and I'm just offering here my full support on that item.
I guess I will second that. Just a repeat on priorities. I really appreciate you putting in the transportation information and just, really emphasizing that, but also the racial justice and equity. For me, home ownership is extremely important, whether it's similar to reparation, rise, anything that really build a foundation for people for economic means and justice. I think it's really important because as a refugee, as a lived experience, I'm able to see intergenerational wealth, whereas other folks in different communities don't. And I ask the question every day, why? Why is there a gap? And so home ownership is different than affordable housing. And so I really appreciate you writing that terminology in there. So thanks.
And I might just say quickly to the both the comments of Councilmember Perez and Councilmember Van, there's several tentacles to those two issues, right? Where certainly I will let you know that the mayor has been very vocal and will continue to be about the needs to have structured parking and something that's going to work at that South Renton Transit Center, and we'll be meeting with the county executive, for example, later in the week to reinforce that. And on affordable home ownership, we continue to work at the King County level and at the federal level and everywhere we can to try and boost that. So points well taken.
Nope. Doug, you answered my question. Thank you very much. The garage.
Big issue.
All right,
I have one more. I just don't worry. I want to pile on real quick on the active transportation portion and say I do appreciate that portion of the agenda. I know it is a huge priority to figure out that south end and build on what the legislature did with East Rail. Also, I appreciate what you threw out there as far as Renton being kind of a connection point, similar to Redmond, for these multi-use paths where we have all these trails convening here and figuring out how we get them to connect. I know there is a lot of drive and push in the legislature to get those things connecting together and to build those pathways out. Certainly in the cycling and running community out there for sure, to get those. And as we see more e-bikes probably become a more prevalent form of transportation, really building them in as our transportation infrastructure, seeing that as a viable solution for people to get to work. So I do want to definitely draw attention to support that. The question I had, I guess I wanted to go to, and this will be the last one I have before we adjourn, unless anyone else has any other questions. Housing benefit districts. I just wanted to, can you remind me again what the holdup was last session, why it didn't pass, and what we have differently that's going to get it done this year? Because I don't recall specifically, unless it was just the clock ran out issue.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mr. President. It was Councilmember Cindy Ryu's bill, and it was a housing benefit district that would have enabled sales tax credit for a few cities that are a fair ways down the road with transit-oriented development work that involved affordable housing. So the bill last year would have had that for Renton, Everett, Tacoma, and Shoreline. And so there were a couple things I think at play. One was the legislature in the finance committee. There were a lot of questions about what about this bill? Didn't we do things to help with affordable housing through House Bill 1590 and the year before House Bill 1406? And what does this do differently? And other legislators said, why just these 4 communities? Could you do something for more communities that are involved in TOD? And at the point it hit the House Finance Committee, and with the number of bills they had, it got stuck. And so there's a very definite interest to bring it back this year. And how it's crafted, I think, will be highly dependent on how far it moves.
Councilor Paris, and then
No, I
Just have a last question. I did have lunch with Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck, and he's very passionate about the middle housing. And he was very upset because he met with the AWC leadership, and they basically told him, no, we are not giving local control. And I was trying to explain him the job that we're doing in Renton, and we cannot be measured with other cities that they have not doing the job. So I have follow some representatives that they are still very active, trying to bring the middle housing and attacking local authorities because what they call we should give up the local control. Do we know where we are? Do we know if they're bringing any? I know that they're bringing something next year, but I know who is sponsoring the House. Last year, Senator Mona Das is sponsoring the Senate. Do you know who's sponsoring the Senate this year? A bill in the middle house.
Well, I know Senator Cooter will be very involved. I don't know who the Senate sponsor will be per se. In the House last session, and I suspect again in the coming session, was Representative Bateman from the Olympia area. And that's a classic example, Councilmember Perez, of something we have on the agenda. We didn't stick it on the front page, but where we'll frankly be very involved is that whole question of, how much do you mandate to get more middle housing types on the ground? Renton, obviously, you all know very well, a lot of work is being done, and the city has a housing action plan, and more efforts are going through the Planning Commission, and you will be brought more ideas around increasing middle housing types as we go, and a very active effort underway to increase accessory dwelling units. So, I would put Renton in the category of a city that is doing a lot of work in these areas. As you might imagine, other cities maybe not as much. And so, then to get 281 cities to get forward progress, what do you require at the state level? And that's been, a very high-spirited debate. And the AWC's put together a housing group with local elected officials and bringing in other interest groups, and they've put the shells of a proposal together that they'll be trotting out more actively in the next couple weeks. So I think we'll see that be a big issue again in the 23 session, and one where we'll need to keep our seat at the table for sure. And you and many others, as far as local elected officials, testified, and we may ask you all to do so again in the coming session.
Thank you.
Thanks for flagging that for sure. That was definitely on my mind as well. So, do we have any additional questions, comments? All right. Well, Doug, I want to thank you so much, not only for what you prepared tonight, but obviously for your many years of service to the city of Renton. So we'll certainly miss you guiding us through all this. Dave, I'm sure you'll do just fine. So we definitely didn't enter into a harder, this looks like a lot, but, I think you'll do great. No, we have full confidence in you. So thank you so much. And obviously, to be continued on approving this. We'll come back. I think we had a lot of good discussion here tonight, and the goal, obviously, in a week's time to see if we can't get to some sort of consensus or agreement on this. So thank you all very much. We will be adjourned now.